All right, so we're going to talk about. I wonder what this is. What color is this? Oh no, can't deal with that. We're going to talk about Washington's second term. From 1793, 1797. In 1789, what event occurred? The French Revolution. I've often said that many of the ideas that the founding fathers put into practice with the American Revolution and the U.S. Constitution were French ideas, but Americans tend to be people of action. All right, you might say maybe that's a stereotype, maybe that's not true, but I think it is. And it at times some is not necessarily a good thing because we sometimes maybe don't appreciate things just to appreciate them, like art or certain things in education. Okay, because Americans tend to be very pragmatic. Okay, so just like everything, I'm not putting a value on it. It's not saying it's good or bad. It's just maybe a characteristic, part of American culture. Anyway, but the French taking on um, or kind of maybe being to some extent inspired by the American Revolution. There was a lot more to it than that. Um, but they had their own revolution, although it was not, it didn't quite get the results that the U.S. Revolution did, because what happened with the French Revolution eventually is that it caused so much turmoil that a dictator came to power known as Napoleon. And why is this? Well, if you try to change something through a revolution, if you try to change something that has been entrenched for a long time, like the monarchy and the feudal system that was in France, it's probably you're going to have a more difficult time making that change. Whereas in the United States, since we didn't have any system that was really entrenched, maybe it was easier to create something new. I don't know. That's just my own little Um, and it was the French Revolution that really changed, created even more party sentiment in the United States. A conservative rebellion of the nobility against the king. The French Revolution was pretty much applauded by all Americans who were gratified that the French, as I kind of said earlier, were somehow inspired by the American Revolution and this idea of a city upon a hill. But by 1793, the French Revolution started going a little bit haywire, like I said, and even radical and very bloody. They even had something that was known as the Reign of Terror, in which you had the guillotine, all right, that would hack off people's heads. I was actually in the French Revolution and a victim of the Reign of Terror. This is obviously a past life of mine. And when the guillotine chopped my head off, I did kind of see a little bit of what was going on, and then that was it. It was over. But anyway, so there was some political people like Jefferson, who belonged to the again, the newspapers are the ones that really, were kind of starting a lot of this. Well, they called Jefferson a Democratic Republican, and Hamilton and John Adams and others Federalist. The Jefferson tended to be in support of the French Revolution, even during these really bad radical times, whereas Hamilton and these guys tended to be against it and was more for Great Britain. Now, what do I mean by for Great Britain? Well, what we will see in the 1790s is countries around, nations around Europe, European nations, kind of gathering in order to restore the monarchy. They were afraid that some of these ideas would spread around Europe. And so war broke out. And you saw a lot of, you may have seen that movie, what was it, Master and Commander, I think. It dealt with a lot of what was going on between, the war going on between the French and the British during this period of time. Okay. Washington, however, was smarter than that, and one of the things that he was concerned with was kind of getting involved in these foreign events. And so Washington issued a proclamation of neutrality, and I think that was pretty smart. All right. In 1794, an event known as the Whiskey Rebellion occurred. This caused really a rebellion of farmers, more out west. And we say west at that time, we don't mean Arizona, or New Mexico or California. I mean, we're talking about like maybe just west of the Appalachian Mountains, or even within the Appalachian Mountains, or western Pennsylvania, in that area. Anyway, Washington ordered the suppression of the rebellion by 12,900 militia from Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. And like I said, the rebellion really occurred more like, I guess, in western Pennsylvania. A force larger than any Washington had commanded during the American Revolution. It was basically like killing a flea with a cannon, and under the command of a guy by the name of Henry Lee, also known as Light Horse Harry Lee, and the father of Robert E. Lee, who commanded the Army of Virginia during the U.S. Civil War. Anyway, he was accompanied by Alexander Hamilton. Now, can you imagine if today, we went to war and we'd actually have people that were serving in the cabinet, that actually went out there and fought? That might change, a lot of things. But of course, that's not happening. Anyway, by the time the huge army arrived in western Pennsylvania, there were really no rebels to be found. The army had to struggle to find 20 prisoners who could be marched down Market Street in Philadelphia. Only 2 prisoners were found guilty, and Washington pardoned them both, calling one a simpleton and the other insane. Although the cost of crushing the rebellion was more than 3 years' revenue from the tax, Washington considered it important to assert Congress's constitutional right to tax and to uphold the rule of law, which he was, unfortunately, I guess because we don't like paying taxes, was right. Now, one of the only uncontroversial events of the 1790s was Pinckney's Treaty. In the treaty, which was negotiated by U.S. Minister to Spain, Thomas Pinckney. That's why it's called Pinckney's Treaty. The Spanish accepted the 31st parallel as the northern boundary of Spanish Florida and granted Americans the right to freely navigate the Mississippi River and to deposit goods in New Orleans for 3 years. Okay, so the main thing is it set the boundaries between Florida and Georgia. And the main thing is the right of deposit in New Orleans. Now, who controls or who owns Louisiana and New Orleans at this time? Actually, the Spanish. All right. This was from 1762 to 1801, I think. And then, of course, Napoleon buys it. Let's see. Actually, Napoleon buys it from Spain in 1801, and then the United States buys Louisiana in 1803. Okay, and we will talk about that a little bit later. The Louisiana Purchase. Okay. Let me see. I'm not sure if this is 1801 or 1800. When we get to that, I'll let you know to be sure. Okay. But anyway, in the 1790s, Spain controlled Louisiana. In fact, when you go to New Orleans, Louisiana today, the French Quarter, the architecture is actually Spanish. Okay. Now we're going to finish today's lecture with Washington's farewell address. And what Washington, first of all, decided to only be a two-term president. He wanted to set precedent. And this precedent lasted until Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who served several terms. In fact, he was elected in 1932 and served until he died in 1945, early 1945. So let's so why, there was no, and then now, I mean, there's a constitutional a constitutional amendment that says that a president can only serve 2 terms, and it's good because it's a very stressful job, and you can see how people age after serving, just 1 term as president. Obama, he's got gray hair and all kind of stuff right now. Anyway, so Washington kind of, like, again, he didn't think it was a good idea to, he didn't want the executive branch to become like a monarchy. He viewed himself as sort of a modern day Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus had been a Roman general who retired and was working on his farm, and Rome was besieged by invaders, and it looked like Rome may collapse. And so the political leaders went and asked Cincinnatus to save Rome. And so Cincinnatus came out of retirement. He got his forces together, and they repelled the invasion. And then at that time, Cincinnatus could have been the dictator of Rome, but instead he retired again, and he went back to his farm. And Washington admired Cincinnatus. He looked at Cincinnati, like I said, like he wanted people to view him, and historians to view him as sort of a Cincinnatus. Plato, I may have told you that before. Plato, the famous Greek philosopher, said that one of the major problems of democracy is that the people that want to be in power are the people that should not be in power. So Washington decided not to run for a 3rd term. And in his farewell address, he warned against political parties that divided the nation by section, which would, he felt, end in a civil war, which of course he was exactly right, and said that the United States should steer clear of permanent alliances with European nations. Doesn't mean that the United States should be isolationist, but should not get involved in these like different alliances and feel compelled to go to war over things that really had nothing to do with us. And so our next lecture is going to deal with both John Adams' administration and Jefferson's administration.